It's Bullseye. I'm Jesse Thorn. My first guest is Chris Gethard. For 6 years, he's been the host of The Chris Gethard Show. It started out on New York City Public Access. Later on, it moved to Fusion. You might have also seen him on Broad City or in Don't Think Twice, the Mike Birbiglia movie that came out last year. Chris is also a stand-up. His latest special is sort of a mix of stand-up special and one-man show. It's called Career Suicide. Gethard produced it with Judd Apatow. It'll debut on HBO Saturday, May 6th. In Career Suicide, Gethard talks really specifically about alcoholism, depression, death. But he does it in ways that are totally human, really identifiable, very funny. Here's a clip from the show. Here he's talking about his early days in show business, running from audition to get bit parts and commercials.
I get acting, I start getting acting work. I'm getting mostly commercials. If you search my name on YouTube, to this day, you go deep enough in the search results, you can still find a very annoying commercial for H&R Block where I wear lederhosen. You can find that? And I once auditioned for a Subway sandwich commercial to play the role of man who is unattractive to women. That was the character's name in the script. They couldn't even call him Doug or something like that. I didn't book that part, I'm assuming because...
Chris Gethard, welcome back to Bullseye. It's good to see you.
Great to see you too.
So your new special or one-man show, whatever you want to call it, is called Career Suicide. It's largely about your mental health. Do you feel exhausted by talking about your mental health? You know what I mean?
100%, yeah. One of the great things about the special coming out is that maybe I can stop. Everything I have to say about it is in that special. And when I get asked about it, I can just tell people, find it on all your HBO-driven streaming platforms from this point forward, because that's really what I have to say about it. Because it has been many years of talking about it in some form or another, and definitely it's exhausting, and doing the show more exhausting than I thought, for sure.
It feels like part of what you are doing in the special and also in your memoir, which was the last time you were on the show, I think, is in writing about it and in performing about it, you are talking yourself into engaging with it fully.
Yeah, I think that's a very astute observation. I think there's definitely a part of me that knows that if it's not hidden, it has less power over me. If it's not something I'm trying to, overcome quietly in private, then other people might actually help. And there's something to be said too for, anytime I put it out there and other people respond to it, sometimes people, people have seen the show and they'll wait afterwards and they'll say, oh, I really identify with that. Thank you for saying that. It rang true. And that's really nice, but it's also, that goes in my direction too. It's nice for me to feel less alone. And there's certain jokes in the show that anytime they get a laugh, I'm like, okay, other people feel that? Great, good. So yeah, it's
What's an example of that kind of joke?
One of the things that was very heartwarming for me was in the course of the show, I have a whole stretch where I talk about the side effects of different medications that I've been on. And on certain nights, there would be people who would, sometimes a comedian will go out and say mention Toledo, and then the people from Toledo start clapping. I'm in a situation where I mention Wellbutrin and the other Wellbutrin takers start clapping. And that's the perfect example of something where I'm like, this feels cool. I've set up an environment where this is okay to not just put out there when it's not always okay to put out there, but people are actually cheering for it, and they understand why that's funny. And that makes me feel connected to them. And this is in a section about how brutal side effects can be. And we're connecting in this way. It was very much an asset to me as well in those moments.
But that's a challenge and a burden as well. I mean, it may be different for you, but I know that in my experience, when people share something like that about themselves with you on the basis of your performance, it is an incredible gift that means a lot, but it is also a hard thing to shoulder sometimes.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that's a real double-edged sword in the sense of a big part of why I'm putting on this show is because this was so hard for me to talk about And I have that in my head of like, I just want to really put on a funny show. But maybe if someone sees it and they find it easier to talk about, that's great. Maybe someone sees it and talks to their kid a little more freely. That's great. Like those are, I want to make the show that I wish I had when I was, 18, 19 years old and didn't have an outlet that would spur this conversation. Like I'm psyched about that. At the same time, this is real for me and I'm not always emotionally equipped to take on more. And there's times where people tell me things that are very personal or scary or dark, and it fills up. I've had like people wait for me after the show to tell me about times that they've hurt themselves or people in their lives who are gone now. Like, and it makes me feel great that I've created something where people feel like they can air this stuff out, get it off their chests, but it's also very hard.
Do you feel like if you could cross out your condition from your life, you would?
I think I would. If I could go back, I think I would. But it's interesting. A few years ago, I opened up the mail one day, and I had a letter from my mom, and it was a handwritten letter that she mailed me, like the actual U.S. Postal Service. And this is not a thing that happens so often anymore. So immediately I was like, what is this? And I read it, and it was this. Clearly, my mom had put a lot of thought into it, and it was this letter where she basically said, I've thought a lot about your stuff and your childhood, and some of the things that you and your brother dealt with. And she's like, for a long time, I felt a lot of guilt and wondered if I should have done some things differently. But now you're older, and I see your work, and I see that there's a lot of young people who are getting a lot out of it, and she's like, I have to say, like, I wouldn't take it back because I see who you've turned into and what you've done with it, and I think I think you're helping some kids out there. As you can imagine, that was a very emotional experience for me to read that. As far as I go, though, yeah, I'd probably change it. If I could go back and not have to deal with some of the stuff I dealt with, for sure. But my mom had that perspective on it, which was both nice to read and also very intense, very heartbreaking. Me personally, though, if I could go back to 1991, 1992 and just flip a switch and not have to deal with it, probably.
Let's play a clip from my guest Chris Gethard's television show, The Chris Gethard Show, because it's... I don't know if you could say anything is representative of the show because a lot of things happen. But you have Paul Scheer and Jason Mantzoukas, two very brilliant comic actors on the show, and especially brilliant improvisers, who I'm sure you've probably known 15 or 20 years from the Upright Citizens Brigade world. And on this episode of the show, two things are going on. One is you've brought a dumpster onto the show, and the plan is to investigate what's in the dumpster.
Yeah.
The second thing that's going on in the show is that you're making clear that you do not have further plans for the show. So if the dumpster thing doesn't pan out, the stakes are there's nothing else to have happen. There's no plan B.
Yeah.
So let's take a listen.
Welcome to the Chris Gethard Show. I'm very, very happy because we're about to do, I think, the dumbest show we've done in years. We brought our dumpster into the studio, and you guys are going to have a chance to guess what's in there. We're asking you guys to call in, Skype in. You can take a guess, and that's the whole show. That's it. I'm going to tell you a couple things about this. One, if you don't guess, I'm wheeling this thing out of here, and you never get to see it. And two, if you guess right away, we have no backup plan. No backup plan at all. And I love that this already feels like a late-night UCB show circa 2001. Because my old friends, Paul Scheer and Jason Mantzoukas, are here, ladies and gentlemen.
This is the theory I wanted to give you, is that to some extent, the format of your show feels like an institutionalization of your mania, which is to say that you have found a way to have the absurd commitment to terrible ideas that comes from mania, that is, from what I've been told and what's been described to me, totally amazing feeling.
Yeah.
without necessarily specifically having to be in a manic state.
Yes. Well, it's funny because, I certainly, as an artist, I don't think making art has sorted out my issues in any way. Therapy and medication have done that. But I do think the art became a healthy way to direct some stuff that wasn't always healthy. I think there's certainly a type of endorphin or adrenaline that I clearly need in my head. And it's better for it to happen over the airwaves in a way that's intentional than to let it just set in day to day. So yeah, I think your observations are correct for sure. It is bad ideas. Like when we started the Gethard Show at UCB before public access, I started every show by saying, I want this to go well. I've put a lot of thought into it. I really genuinely hope it goes well. But if it doesn't, my promise to you is that the disastrous other potential outcome will be as entertaining as if it went well. Like if we crash and burn, you're going to love watching that, probably more than you will if this even goes well. That's always been an attitude that I stand by.
One of the things you talk about in your special show, Career Suicide, is the extent to which you had linked your emotional health to your career. This presumption that if your career was successful, that you would be emotionally healthy because of that.
Yeah.
Two-part question. Do you feel differently about that now, or are you able to feel differently about that? The second part is, do you think you would feel comfortable doing work in your career that was good work, but not capital G, capital W, good works? You know what I mean? Like just if you got cast on as the second guy in a funny sitcom and you were doing a good job of that.
Yeah.
And the sitcom wasn't evil, but neither was it a place for teenagers to come out.
Right. It wasn't guided by this sense of urgency or the chip on its shoulder that my work clearly has now. Like I'm definitely a workaholic. It's a problem. It's probably like one of the biggest things I still wrap my head around is that I get too caught up in career stuff, A lot of that is that there's the anxiety that it could all go away tomorrow, which it could. Getting better about that, I have a little bit more stability than I've ever had before. That's a nice feeling, but it still is this thing I have to remind myself of. I always had this feeling of like, like if I can just get one of those big jobs, everybody will have to notice it and they'll have to admit that I was right going for this, and they'll have to admit that I have what it takes, which presupposed that there were all these people doubting me, which was not really true. Like I had this chip on my shoulder about proving everybody wrong, and then I would accomplish certain things and I wouldn't feel that validation. I had to kind of admit and cop to the fact of like, there is no them that I can prove wrong and then there'll be this victory. Like something's going on inside. I actually once witnessed, I was at ASCAT in New York, backstage at UCB, and there was a friend of mine who was a cast member on SNL talking with a friend of mine who was a correspondent on The Daily Show, and they were stressing so hard. Man, I don't know what's going on. Am I going to get, what's my next gig? Blah, blah, blah. I might have to move across the country. And they were so stressed, and I was like, man, I always figured if I got one of those jobs, I'd be happy. You're in The Daily Show. You're on SNL. You've reached the mountaintop. Now you can kick back because you've proven everything you need to prove. And I was like, oh, if they're still so stressed out, I have no hope. So I better just learn to enjoy the things I do, because getting stuff is not going to fix any of my problems. As far as like, could I settle in and really enjoy it if I was doing something that was maybe a little more square than some of the, or standard, you could say, some of the stuff I've done? I don't know. Like,
I mean, you could be on the next 30 Rock. 30 Rock's the funniest show.
It's a great show.
There's more funniness in that show than there is in, but it's not about much more than being funny. I mean, it's about some other thing.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to diminish 30 Rock, one of my favorite shows of all time.
Of course. But it doesn't have that fire in its gut trying to prove something.
Right.
It doesn't have this mission statement of trying to like break the system and sneak in the back door. I feel like I probably could. I imagine, I think hard about it, because there's a part of me that's also like, if something like that were to happen, like, I don't think anybody's going to doubt that I tried at this point, Nobody's doubting my integrity or my indie credibility at this point. Like, I think anyone who knows my work would say, that guy spent years bending over backwards to try to do this thing. And at times he was the only one who knew why he kept going. At times I had visibly quit, and other people, fans or other people working on the show, would convince me to keep going. So there's a part of me that's like, at a certain point, I've done my part, and maybe I could move on and just do something. I'm sure I'd find some side project very quickly to push the buttons that fuel a lot of my mischief. One of the things that makes me want to keep accomplishing stuff is, you know, you see people in this industry who eventually get to a point where they can produce other people's work. And I'm not quite there yet, but I would love to be, because I feel like one of the things I have going right now is I remember what it was like for me 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago when nobody was particularly interested and I had to just like kick down some doors and make it happen for myself. I'd love to find the comedians who are in that spot and help them not have to spend half a decade on public access TV to make it happen. So that's another thing, is like, maybe if I was to get one of those bigger jobs, that could give me that credibility, and then I could bring some other stuff into the world. But who knows? I don't know. I'll sell out someday. Everybody does, right? Who knows?
A friend of mine was telling me this past week, he has a friend who sold a company for $65 million. And he said this to me as a kind of warning. He said, my friend sold his company for $65 million. Now all he does is make bad art. And I was like,
it's the dream.
Make bad art? Yeah. I'm in.
That's all.
I'm already making bad art.
That's what I've been doing for years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody's not really getting paid that well for it.
Yeah.
You just
I certainly don't have $65 million for it.
I don't have to find a market for my bad art. That's perfect.
Yeah. It is funny, though, talking about the idea of like moving on. It's, you know, the Gethard show. When I talk about the Gethard show, for years, that has been my people. And they're still my people. They're punk kids. They're weirdos. They're artists. A lot of them are queer. A lot of them are doing things their own way. You know, a lot of them, either by choice or by necessity, are people who have walked their own path. And they find this, and it's like, oh, this is a community of people who have walked their own path. It's a beautiful thing. I'm very, very proud of it. Those are my people. But it's funny. They are so DIY that, like, I get the sense online sometimes. I'm really in tune with these people. This past week, I was in a fight with my own fan club online. They stopped comments on my post in the Facebook group that's my fan club, the Gethheads. And I was honestly mad about it. And they were like, we don't care. We're shutting you down. Like, I have this contentious relationship. And I get the sense sometimes that, like, they are such underground people and so passionate about the values of that, that me being in Mike Birbiglia's movie is a little bit of a sellout move. The Beautiful Anonymous podcast, a podcast. They're like, you're getting a little too mainstream for us, buddy. And there's almost like a countercultural element to the Gethard show where I have to grow and I have to evolve. And I'm in it's a very fascinating thing to realize. I don't know if they want me to. And that's a very odd feeling. It's a very odd feeling. I can feel them being happy for me, but I can also feel a lot of my older school fans feeling like, man, like he's really growing up and moving on. And I don't know exactly how to handle that, because I feel like that's what I've always been working towards, is trying to get a better head on my shoulders. It's weird. I don't know how to go. I'm heading, you know, especially thinking about HBO, like that's a bigger platform than I've ever had.
You got Judd Apatow's name before you're it's on top of your credits.
Pretty fancy stuff. How much longer can I claim to be this rebel, try to throw rocks from the outside the house, you know? I don't know how much longer people are going to buy that. But I don't really know what else I am.
Are you worried that you're not going to get the Tonight Show and you're going to have to move to CBS and enlarge the band?
Oh, my God.
Play to a bigger theater?
If I could follow that man's life, that would be... I
don't know. I just read a biography of that man.
Oh yeah,
his life sounds horrible. Yeah, frankly,
I can only talk about what I have witnessed as a consumer of pop culture.
Oh yeah, the greatest like genius ever. Yeah, of course.
The most brilliant, out of the box genius. A kid certainly can't.
He doesn't seem thrilled about it.
No, as far as the things you read about the actual loneliness of that pursuit, doesn't seem great. But I think a lot about if he would be proud of the Chris Gethard show. That's like a major concern of mine, is like if footage of this ever went across David Letterman's desk, would he be psyched? Because in my mind, a lot of what's behind it is not talking bad about anybody, but late night just used to be a lot weirder, I think. It just used to be weirder. He was weird. Conan still is weird. Even Carson had a lot of weird stuff on there. There used to be this element to it where it would get a little chaotic or unpredicted. And now, in my opinion, it seems much more controlled. And that's okay. But I want my show to be an hour of just that. Letterman used to sometimes just like get a permit to shut down the block so he could pour 10,000 rubber balls off the roof of his studio onto the street. And that was it. No thought about it beyond that. Let's just send the guy into the deli across the street with a camera so I can talk to the deli guy. No planning beyond that. We're not scripting what Rupert the deli man has to say. Certainly, you know. Let's bring Harvey Picar on and just get in an actual fight. Let's have Jerry Lawler slap Andy Kaufman across the face. These unplanned, chaotic moments that Letterman in particular, I think, nailed is, to me, that's always been my height of comedy. And I think the Chris Gethard show is an effort for me to go, can we just do a full hour that's just that stuff?
Well, you seem to be obsessed with the genuine sense of danger of that, the genuine sense that failure is at hand.
Yeah.
Because Letterman lived in, there was a long time when Letterman's greatest pleasure was to marinate in failure with a dumb smile on his face.
I love it so much. And to me, it's not even like I think failure's funny. I mean, I do. I think failure is one of the funniest things in the world. But there's also something really necessary about it. And there's something so fun about surviving failure. That's like, with my background as an improviser, one of my favorite things in the world was when an improv show would happen and I would go, I have no idea what's going on. I don't know what anybody's talking about, but I'm surviving. The audience doesn't even realize that I don't know what's up. And I think the same thing with my talk show of like, and the podcast. The podcast is also tweet out a phone number, whatever call comes in, they get to talk for an hour. I just have to deal with it. Like, there's a big part of me that feels like when I succeed, I want to succeed in huge fashion, surprising fashion that nobody saw coming. That dumpster episode, not to be cocky, but like, I think Vulture put out an article saying that was the best hour of TV they saw all year. I'm like, to have an episode as dumb as Guess What's in Our Dumpster, and then like a publication I respect saying something about it, I want to succeed that big off the dumbest idea. But if I don't succeed that big, I want to fail so hard. I want to fall on my face. I want people to watch me get caught. I want people to watch me just get blindsided by the failure of my own idea. I don't want a safety net because I think that's more interesting to watch for the consumer. What I never, ever want is to land in a safe middle ground where you plan it so meticulously and you understand what you have so much that you can't take chances beyond that. I never want to get to a place ever in my career with any work I do where I'm reasonably sure it's going to end well and then it ends reasonably well. I want to either succeed big or fail hard. I think both of those are more fun and interesting, both for myself and the consumer of comedy, than a safe middle ground. I just never want to land in that middle ground.
Chris, thank you so much for coming back on Bullseye.
Thanks. Sorry I rambled and ranted so much.
Not in the slightest. Chris Gethard's new special of his one-man show is on HBO, and a second season is coming of his television show, The Chris Gethard Show, which is also, incidentally, like the 8th season.
Yeah.
Depending on whether or not you count the many years that he did it for free on public access television. Thanks again, Chris.
Thanks. I hope that was okay.
It was great.